Hi everyone. Today I'd like to talk to you about abstraction and the technique of reductive drawing. We're going to put these two together into one drawing project. So let's first start off by talking about what abstraction is. So far in this class, we've really tried our best to create representational art, which is to try to recreate what we're seeing in front of us with line and shape and value and form to make things look as realistic as possible. But abstract art uses the same visual language of shape, form, color, and line to create a composition that doesn't have a representational interpretation of a subject. So what you're looking at is just a composition that creates a very visually interesting composition that doesn't really necessarily look like something that you would see out in the real world. Now, someone that I would like for us to take inspiration from is Georgia O'Keeffe, who does work both in representational art and in abstract art. And I just wanted to show you an example of some of her work in representational art. And she really pulls a lot of her inspiration from the natural surroundings that are around her. And she really drew from the place where she was and the things that she saw in the world that she lived in. But then what she did was to look very closely at these things, like in a lot of cases, these objects, or I'm sorry, at flowers, where she would zoom in really close to the point where all you started to see were just shapes, color, line, value, and you don't necessarily see them as flowers anymore. So she took something that was representational and created an abstract painting out of it. Here's another example where it really is about line and value and shapes, and not really so much about saying this is a flower, but it's really about the visual language that she's using to create an interesting painting. What I would like to do for this assignment is to ask you to do something similar. Find a very natural object, in this case it was like a seashell, and zoom in really close and look at what you can find in those shapes and patterns and the lines. And remember that the finished drawing doesn't necessarily have to look like that object that you started off with, but what you're focusing on is to find all of those little details and draw them out so that you can really accentuate all those fine little nuances that you're seeing in the object that you found. Now, you could find these objects outside around the campus, but we also have a lot of these objects on the shelf in the studio. For instance, these bones. We have a bin, an art bin that's full of really nice little pine cones and pods. And I think there's a crab claw. There's a whole basket that's full of seashells. And if you just take any of these sorts of objects, just remember that what I want to see in the end is not a drawing of a seashell or of a skull, but of a very specific area that you want to zoom in on. So look closely and carefully at this. It's a different way of working. We're not going to sit back and hold up our viewfinders to look at a still life, but we're going to zoom in really close, and you're going to probably hold this object in your hand and inspect it carefully as you draw. And look for those areas where you can really pull out the lights. Now remember, this is a drawing that's going to be about subtractive drawing. I'm going to show you a little demo video in a little while about how to exactly do that. But notice that most of these are kind of in a darker tone, an all over darker tone. And what the students have done is to take an eraser and created almost the entire drawing just by erasing. So notice how these white lines are done in such a nice, beautiful, light and delicate way. It's because they started with an all-over tone of value and used their erasers to pull out the lights. So what you're looking for is where those light areas come in and how you can define them by just drawing with an eraser. So you're using the eraser as a drawing tool in this case. Now, in the very end of the drawing, if you see a few areas where you might want to go back and add some really dark emphasis areas, like in this drawing right here, you can go back and add some more charcoal, but I would like for you to think about most of this drawing as much as you can as something that you would do entirely with an eraser. Notice how this person has taken the eraser and created these sort of really soft, fuzzy kind of a texture with their eraser. And then right here along the stem, there's a very sharp line that creates sort of a highlight, like a shine. So you have two very different surfaces all created by this eraser. And here's another example of someone who started off with a very dark tone. So depending on what tonal value you start with in the background, you're going to have a difference in how dramatic your drawing finishes up. So if you start with a darker tone, you're going to have a lot more darks and lights to really play around with in the end. So I would suggest that you go ahead and start with sort of the darker tones, 3s, 4s, and 5s on your sheet of paper before you get started with your drawing.